Hi. So, first, a couple of things to do before we get into the next talk. One is we're going to give away $3,000 worth of travel. I know. So if you're, if you're not here, well, I mean, you're already here, so I can't tell you guys that. Okay, I'll stop talking. So the other thing is we have some found property. This is an otter clip for your pager, I don't know, or something. I don't know, for your belt. It's a big pager, so this is... Is this anyone's? Anyone? Yeah. Oh, it belongs to you, or you just really want it? No, it belongs. Oh, that's yeah. I won't trade it. Are there any actual policemen in the room? So we can do our random draw without anyone talking to anyone about, yeah, that's fine. Okay, cool. Perfect. John, bro, do you want to draw someone out? Given you know, most contentious question of the morning. We're going to check the questions too. What's the question one is?
What did Tivoli used to be called? Fiber. What is Woo Media? Automated Internet Services Portal. And how many years has Tivoli been sponsoring the NZNOG conference? 1 as Tivoli. 3 total. Name, Fraser McLean. Fraser at amuri.net. Congratulations, Mike Fraser.
We should do like a photo or something. Hold on, John.
Oh.
The official.
Yeah.
Actually, take your name as well. Oh, yeah.
I'll give you my business card.
Sweet. Wow. So the last guy went to base camp. So where are you going? Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Next up, I've had a total mind blank on the person's name, but they're talking about the cable, Hawaii cable. Oh, here he is. Excellent. Hi. Welcome.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hamid Mani, and I'm Sales Director for Hawaii, based in Auckland for New Zealand. So today I want to share some key facts about internet with you. I'm sure you guys know most of it better than me, but it's better to look at it in one place. And then a little bit of overview on what is inside a submarine cable system, and what does it take to implement a submarine cable system, and why it has been so long since the newest cable has been thought through, and then eventually it's happening. A little bit of a system overview on Hawaii and our network design, and also a brief update on the construction program to you guys. And then last but not least, some interesting and cool facts about Hawaii. Hope you enjoy the presentation. So as of 2016, the global IP traffic exceeded 1.1 zettabytes, which was quite a milestone to achieve, which is equivalent to around 96 exabytes per month. This is a massive consumption. And if you look at the chart provided from a Cisco report, you can see that there is a CAGR of almost 24% globally forecasted. Out of this amount of traffic, in fact, more than 98% is being handled through the submarine networks, despite the misperception, which is often there in the public, that satellites carry this traffic. Satellites account for less than 2%, indeed. And it's interesting to note that about 1.1 million kilometers of subsea cables in service in 430 networks. And the total aggregate capacity of the submarine cable networks are somewhere around 300 terabit per second. Now, these are the global stats. If you look at New Zealand, Chorus recently published a report. I believe there was some reference made to it this morning. They have exceeded 1.3 terabit per second aggregate in their network. And Chorus obviously represents only a fraction of New Zealand internet network. And then as of now, they have got an average consumption of 174, and they forecasted to reach 680 in about 2 years from now, which is almost getting doubled every year. This is quite massive. So a lot of that is obviously being driven by video, but there is a forecast and expectation of the big data and analytics and AR, VR, and all those good things that we do with internet to contribute to that. So it's quite essential to get ready for this huge forecast of growth and then build the capacity for that. And the bottom right, you can see this is a chart supplied from a telegeography report. You can see how the continents are being interconnected using the subsea cables. The size of the bars show the capacity of the link. You can see, well, Australia and New Zealand is combined into one. You can see that we are connected mainly to the US. There are links to Asia as well, and new cables are being built as we speak. So what is there inside a submarine cable? You have got normally a dry plant and a wet plant. In a dry plant, there is the submarine line terminal equipment, which is there to light up the fiber, to transmit and receive the data. You've got the power feed equipment. Most of the subsea cables are nowadays powered. They're repeated, so they need to be fed through the power feed equipment in the dry plant. And then you need to have the network management system for the O&M and reporting and provisioning, etc. Most of the cable landing stations are naturally built close to the water, just to make the landing as easy as possible. There are several considerations made selecting the location for the CLS. That includes the fishing traffic, the shipping traffic, the economic considerations. And all in all, a location is selected, which means the traffic needs to be backhauled on a terrestrial network to a point of presence closest to the CLS. And that is normally part of the dry plant as well. In the wet plant, yes, obviously, I've got the cable itself, and then there are repeaters which amplify the signal, and there are branching units if the traffic is aspiring to any location on the way of the cable, and you've got joints as well. So pretty simple. Technologically, you can see the range of things which are perhaps more than 150 years old to state-of-the-art technological advancements in a subsea cable system. So the cable itself, the core of the cable are the fiber strands, which carry the actual traffic. There is a plastic tube around them, and then there are very high strength steel wires around it to form the shape of the cable. And then there is a copper conductor around it, which is used to feed the submarine equipment in case of a repeated cable system. There is high density of polyethylene around it, which provides the insulation and also protection in deep water deployments. In deep water, the Mother Nature does the protection. There is nothing else around the cable. And then for the medium depth and burials, there is a metallic screen around the cable. And then for the areas where there is a risk of a lot of fishing activities and anchoring, there is single or double armored deployed around the cable. Repeaters are, as just mentioned, they're there to amplify the signal. They do the error detection and correction on the way as well. They are somewhere around 0.5 meter long and about 225 kgs. And this is basically the information coming from the T-Subcom, who is the current vendor of Hawaii. Normally, you have to deploy a repeater every 75 to 80 kilometers based on the design. So you can imagine for long routes how many repeaters are needed along the way. The branching units are there to spare the signal from the trunk to any location to be serviced. You have got the trunk leg there, and you have got the branch legs. Normally, you have got the optical add-drop multiplexing functionality in the branching unit as well. And the length of the branching unit is up to 5 meters, quite long, and the weight is around 400 kg. So now, what it takes to start building a cable from scratch. So a group of people get together and say, okay, let's provide a connectivity from A to B. And the very first step is to conduct a desktop study. Desktop study is just something on the computers and on paper based on the public available data. And the outcome of that is a high-level feasibility study of the route, the approximate length of the route, and the type of the cable to be used. And it will provide a budgetary estimate of how much the project will cost. And if there is still an interest to continue, normally these are really massive investments, massive undertakings, then they start conducting the marine survey. And during the marine survey, the DTS is the starting point. A cable ship will go around the route and start collecting the information, this time using different techniques, including the GPS coordinates, segment by segment, the depth of the deployment, and the cable type to be used. This will provide a fairly accurate information on what it takes to build that cable from A to B. And then normally companies go to tender with the vendors. There are just a few vendors globally producing the cable and its components. And once that is done, there is a factory production for the dry plant equipment and the wet plant equipment. Everything for the wet plant will be integrated and tested in the factory prior to getting loaded onto the ship. You don't want to dispatch it to the sea and realize that something is not working. And then the factory loader starts. The load is quite a timely process. So in Hawaii case, the length of the system is about 15,000 kilometers, and we have been using 2 deployment vessels, each of them carrying almost 7,500 kilometers of the cable. The loading has to happen manual, so you can imagine the fellows who did this. They walked along the cable for 7,500 kilometers. Obviously, this wasn't done by one, but it's quite an activity to be done. And then the actual marine lay, the marine operation starts, which involves, first of all, to do a route clearance. Normally, if there is any known objects on the way of the deployment, during the marine survey, we come to know about it, and then it will be removed from the route. And then there is something called the pre-lay grapnel run, which basically clears the route for the plowing. When it comes to the deployment of the cable, for anything in shallow water, a burial is needed just to protect the cable. And by shallow water, we mean anything between 15 meters to 1,500 meters. And then for anything beyond 1,500 meters, we just do a surface lay of the cable, and we rely on the protection by the nature. So on Hawaii's case, the maximum depth that we have got on the route is somewhere around 4,000 to 5,000 meters, depending on the features on the seabed. Here are some photos of the process that I just spoke about. On the top left photo, you can see the cable being loaded onto a freighter. We had to do this just to expedite the timing of the project. And then the freighter was dispatched to Taiwan, where the responder ship was waiting for the cable to be transferred to the cable tanks on the ship. The bottom photo shows the Global Sentinel ship, which is leaving the factory in New Hampshire in the US, and it started the lay of the northern hemisphere part of the cable. And it's, by the way, already completed. These photos have been taken last week in Auckland. The responder ship arrived in Auckland, and we hosted an event. The middle one shows the plow machine, which is something really huge, 35 tons of instrument, and it's deployed in 1,500 meters of water depth doing the plowing and cable burial. And then the right-hand photo shows the front view of the remotely operated vehicle, which is used for the cable repairs, cable cuts, if there is an operation needed at the bottom of the ocean, or if you're not satisfied with the depth of the burial when we're laying the cable, it goes back along the route, and using the water jetting technique, it pushes the cable further down. So a little bit on Hawaii cable system overview. as I just mentioned, it's a 15,000 kilometer cable system. It's the newest trans-Pacific cable system being built. It's a turnkey contract which has been awarded to Tyco Electronic T Subcom. It's been a 27 months of deployment program, and it's scheduled to be ready for service in June 2018. Hawaii is a single cable, i.e. there is no protection. It's providing direct connectivity on 4 major segments: New Zealand to Australia, New Zealand to US, Australia to US, and Hawaii to the continental US. And as for the Pacific Islands, we're connecting some of them, passing through. American Samoa is being built along with the main lay of the cable, whereas we are provisioning branching units for Fiji, New Caledonia, and Tonga. And then a little bit of the network design. We have got 1 fiber pair between New Zealand and Australia, which is capable of handling 120 waves of 100 gig per second. And then between New Zealand and the US, we have got another fiber pair, which is capable of handling 106 waves of 100 gig per second. From Australia to US, we are also building 2 fiber pairs, each of them handling 106 times 100 gigabit per second. We are planning to host our NOG in Auckland in New Zealand, and we will have a redundant NOG in the US for disaster recovery. So some highlights of the achievements of the construction program so far. We were granted the FCC license, which is essential to operate as an operator in the US territories in December 2017. This is quite a lengthy process. For the ones who are familiar, it was quite an achievement for us. Out of the 15,000 kilometer, more than 10,000 has been built. The Northern Hemisphere is done and dusted, and the cable ship is actually now in Mangawhai Heads, where is the landing point of the Hawaii cable in New Zealand. And once the landing is completed, it will start building to Norfolk Island and all the way to the north, where it meets with the cable, which is the middle of ocean, and then the final splice will happen. So we have completed the landings in Pacific City, which is the landing point for Hawaii cable in the US, in Sydney, and in Hawaii. It's all good for the ready for service date that we have been communicating to the market and to our anchor customers for June 2018. Just talking about that, we have been enjoying a very strong support from the New Zealand government. I acknowledge Rianza here, and then Jamie is going to present. Rianza has been an anchor customer committing to Hawaii cable and playing an essential role for this becoming a reality. We have got also international players who have already committed to the cable, showing their trust and confidence in the project going forward. So also to share some interesting facts about Hawaii. Hawaii being a 15,000 kilometer cable and have that many of fiber pairs has got enough fiber inside it to go twice around the equator. The total design capacity of Hawaii cable system is 43.8 terabit per second, which is sufficient to download around about 2,000 high definition DVDs per second, or watch and stream 1.7 million 4K TV streams simultaneously. At this capacity, which by the way is not going to be lit at the day one, we just light it up as per the demand growth. We are able to provide, to cater for 10 times more than the aggregate capacity for Australia and New Zealand currently put together. So this is really future-proofing the demand of New Zealand and Australia and the Pacific nations. And this is just as per the current technology. Obviously, the technology will advance, and with the SLT equipment going further, this capacity will be multiplied by a few factors. And then the tiny glass inside the core of the system is just at the diameter of 1/4 of a hair strand. Everything else is to protect it. So I just want to play this video, which was taken 2 days prior to Christmas, landing in Hawaii. And with that, I will finish my presentation.
We are now at Kapolei on the west coast of Oahu, and today is a great day for Hawaii because we are landing the Hawaii cable in Hawaii. The cable ship that is behind me, the Global Sentinel, has arrived this morning very early at sunrise, and we have started the operation of putting the cable on shore. This is a very important communication system that will be serving Hawaii with very, very large capacity. In total, we will have more than 60 terabits of capacity available from Hawaii. So we are on board the Global Sentinel. The Global Sentinel is a very large cable ship installing the Hawaii cable system. The installation of the cable started in Oregon at Pacific City. The ship had more than 8,000 kilometers of cable on board and has now laid 4,300 kilometers from Oregon to Hawaii. We will pull the cable out of the ship to bring the cable ashore so that Hawaii will have very high capacity access both to the US mainland but also to southern countries of Australia and New Zealand. And at this time, the cable has landed in the beach manhole. This is a great day for Hawaii, but it is also a great day for Hawaii because we are the first cable on the island that is completely neutral without ownership of any carrier or content provider, so that it will be readily accessible at competitive prices for all users of capacity. We are working together with DR Fortress, which is the biggest data center here on the island. This is a great partnership that will last for the long term and will provide completely neutral capacity for transmission and storage. The cable ship is going to sail soon southwards to reach the vicinity of American Samoa. At that time, the mainland US, Hawaii, New Zealand and Australia will be all connected, and we will be ready for service at the end of June. At that time, any user will be able to connect either from the mainland to Hawaii or from the US in general to both New Zealand and Australia.
So yeah, that's it from my side. Any questions, I'll be glad to answer. If I have time.
No,
Yeah, okay.
sorry. Thank you very much. Next up's Phil. You good? I bought a sample.
Okay. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Philip Hunt, and I work for Vodafone in a solution consultant role. I'm going to give a short overview of the Tasman Global Access Cable, also known as the TGA cable. It goes from Sydney to Raglan. And to start, just a short video to give some background.
Data usage in New Zealand's exploding. It's growing 80-100% every year, which means it's doubling year after year.
International internet traffic that's largely relied on one undersea cable until now.
It's vital for our country to make sure that global connectivity is strong, future-proofed and very high capacity.
What you see here is the beginnings of the Trans-Tasman Global Access, a new fibre optic cable system to be laid between Raglan and Sydney.
What we're putting in here is like 20 terabytes of capacity. That's a lot of capacity.
A kind of on-ramp to an underwater communications highway stretching right around the planet.
20 terabits, not bytes. So in December 2014, Vodafone, Spark and Telstra announced a joint venture to build the cable, TGA cable. Total cost of about 100 million New Zealand dollars. The system investment is shared, 46% to Vodafone, 46% to Spark, and the balance to Telstra. Cable has 4 fibres. It's nearly 2,300 kilometres long with 20 repeaters. The system was deployed by Alcatel Submarine Networks, which is now part of Nokia. The terrestrial backhaul from a cable landing station to the POPs leverages existing infrastructure on both sides of the Tasman. So this is really just showing a high-level timeline of the JB announcement through to RFS in 2017. During the deployment, there were a couple of setbacks. We were delayed several months due to the Bass Strait fibre fault. Not fibre, a cable fault. It was a power cable between Tasmania and mainland Australia. So the Ile de Ré cable ship, an Alcatel ship, was redirected to go and fix that. And then also during the lay, the Ile de Ré cable ship struck an issue where the plough was damaged, so that set us back a couple of months as well. But RFS, March 2017, systems up and running and in service with traffic. The initial concept was circa 2012 through to delivery 2017. So obviously these things take time. It was laid in 4 sections, 2 beach landings and 2 deep water lays with a meet in the middle of the Tasman. As I mentioned, it was built by Alcatel, now part of Nokia, built and tested in France and then shipped to Australia and New Zealand for deployment. Up to 1,200 kilometres is carried on the cable ship, or was carried on the cable ship. The ship had 2 tanks with about 500 kilometres, plus some spares to make up 1,200. Deepest point, about 5 kilometres deep. In shallow water, less than 1,500 metres, the cable is direct buried using a jetting technique with a target depth of 1 metre. An example of where this was done is through the Lord Howe Rise, and I'll show you a picture of where that is. Seabed surface lay for most of the route, and Vodafone upgraded our terrestrial backhaul to carry the main and protection routes. There's actually another point which isn't showing, but 4 months after TGA went RFS, the prior cable, or predecessor cable, known as TAS2, was decommissioned. So that's a map of the approximate route, and you can see just to the right of the middle, the seabed surface topology comes up. That's known as the Lord Howe Rise. Comes up to a depth of about 200 metres in parts, and it's an active fishing ground. So the cable is buried and armoured through that section. As with any submarine cable system, there are 3 main components: the wet plant, dry plant, and backhaul to take the services somewhere useful. So the wet plant obviously consists of the cable itself and its repeaters, and that's spliced onto or terminated at the beach manhole at each end. You can see on the left there, Oxford Falls, distance from the cable landing station to the beach manhole 12 kilometres, and at Raglan the distance is just 2 kilometres. The dry plant consists of 3 main components as well, with the power feed equipment being critical because that supplies power to all the repeaters. And TGA is configured to run at about 6,000 volts with just less than 1 amp. Normal operation doesn't run that high, but it's capable, it's dimensioned to that level. Each PFE, power feed equipment, is able to power the entire system, so we can have a failure at one side and the cable continues service. The SLTE is a second component of the dry plant. That's the electronics that go into on the end of the cable to demux the optical signals, and the network management functions is the third component of the dry plant. Optical backhaul, I'll cover on a separate slide. The cable is being passed around the audience, but it's made of 3 core components. There's a copper barrier which acts as a conductor for powering the repeaters, and that contains a steel vault structure, and within the steel vault structure is a stainless steel tube with fibres. So that core cable is consistent for the whole length of the system, and where it differentiates is dependent on the topology, and whether you're doing a beach landing or trenching through the Lord Howe Rise, we'd use different types of cable. Just a point, a note on the resistance on the cable is 1.6 ohms per kilometre. Some other mechanical properties of the TGA cable, and this shows the various versions of the OALC4 cable. That cable is a Alcatel specific design. So you can see on the right hand side there, 38% of the cable is lightweight, 40% lightweight protected, 19% single armour, which is the cable that you have in the audience, and 2% double armour. Erbium. Erbium is a rare earth metal, and it sits on the periodic table. It enables us to do fast, high capacity bandwidth, and it's a core ingredient to the repeaters that are in a cable system. So erbium doped fibre, so fibre with erbium mixed into the fibre, is coiled inside the repeaters and enables optical amplification to signals, which is different to the old way of doing it, where we had to go from optical to electrical and then back to optical. Just a high-level diagram of the components of a repeater, of which there are 20. So a repeater consists of amplifiers, and it gives, the purpose of it is to give amplification of the optical signal. Optical output power remains constant, even if the input power varies. The repeaters provide automatic correction for changes in cable loss or output of a previous amplifier. Pump lasers are equipped in pairs with their output energy combined and then shared by an optical coupler to pump the amplifiers in both directions. The input and output signal levels are monitored and regulated, so monitored by the supervisors and regulated by the controllers. So the repeaters are all dual redundant, designed to be highly available and have a long service life. They're also bipolar too, so if we have a PFE failure at one side of the system, they can operate on either negative or positive polarity. In March 2016, beach landing activities got underway with a blessing by local iwi. It was a key focus to work with the local community and minimise disruption to the environment. I'm just going to play another short video. So additional protective armour was added to the cable for the beach section and into the water, well past the low tide mark. Prior to the cable burial, the cable was actually sitting on the beach overnight, and due to the weight of the cable, it had actually started to self-bury by the following morning. Divers work in pairs to bury the cable from the low tide mark into the surf. So you have one guy using a jetting device and another guy lifting the cable into the trench that he's done. This is a picture of the beach after the cable's been landed and buried, so you can see that it was restored to its original state. This is a picture of the Raglan cable landing station, designed to be unobtrusive and blend into the local community, and really it just looks like another house on a lifestyle block. Well, I suppose from the street view, it's designed to be blended in. The optical backhaul, obviously the landing point in New Zealand is Raglan. So Raglan and the Vodafone optical network is a logical backhaul choice because of the existing Aqualink presence at Raglan. So Aqualink is a pre-existing cable that Vodafone acquired through Telstra Clear, and it serves as an alternate path via the water to New Plymouth and then through to Wellington. The current configuration for TGA services is via the short path direct to Auckland, with protection path via Wellington, and the protection is done using optical protection switching at the optical layer. So if the TGA consortium determines that it would make sense to have other breakout points like Hamilton or Wellington, then that is an option. Leveraging the Aqualink directly to Wellington would obviously make sense, and even direct to Hamilton from Raglan. At this stage, client interfaces on the system are 10 gig. 10 gig at the POPs. So the POPs are Merrill Drive, Exchange and Simon Street, Vodafone POP. But the actual transport is all 100 gig wavelengths. So we mux 10 by 10 into 100. The option is there to take 100 gig from the system, but current state is 10 by 10. Just a high-level overview of the system. So initial capacity deployed, 500 gig, so 5 by 100 on the wet segment, and we groom that traffic coming off the wet segment at Raglan into 10 by 10, and we can steer those services to either Merrill Drive or Simon Street. Some operational points. So the POPs are Merrill Drive, Simon Street, as I mentioned, and the Australia side, Equinix and Global Switch. It's operated by Vodafone and Telstra through their NZNOGs, and backhaul by Vodafone in New Zealand, backhaul by Telstra in Australia. And that's it.
50 minutes to get through an hour's worth of materials. Really good, right? Good. 40 minutes. For sure.
Good afternoon, and as Gerard said, I'm going to try and fit half an hour into 10 minutes, so let's see how this goes. So I'm here today, I'm from RIANZ. I'm here today to talk about a project kind of dubbed Building Across the Pacific. It's a new international network for RIANZ, and the outshoot of some of that is a benefit to all of New Zealand as well. So, quick RIANZ intro for those of you who don't know who we are. We are the Research and Education Advanced Network of New Zealand. We are a government-owned non-profit company running specialist network services for the research, education and innovation sectors. We turned 10 a couple of years ago, and we are here to make sure that researchers, scientists and innovators in New Zealand can do the work they need to do and have the resources they need to make the discoveries that they are there for. Networking should not be a factor in whether a scientist is able to do their research, and that's what we're here to try and make sure for all of New Zealand's key research entities. We're funded both by our membership as well as direct government funding, and we were very pleased to announce last year a $21 million renewal of our funding for 7 years. So that's $3 million a year direct funding, and that's actually one of the longest term commitments to a research and education network that's been seen in the world. That's a very long term commitment, certainly the longest that we've ever had in New Zealand. So we talk about our members. Who are they? They are New Zealand's 8 universities, New Zealand's 7 or 8 CRIs, depending on where you put Callaghan, the ITPs, Institutes of Technology, Polytechs and Wainanga, and other smaller research and innovation companies. We consider this group on the screen basically our core membership. We have a national network. It was refreshed in 2016. It spans the major centres in New Zealand. There are 14 MX480s, 3 104s and 9 MX80s. The smaller devices serving all the regional centres, and the MX480s for the main towns, which are the 6 towns where we have universities, the 6 cities where we have universities in New Zealand. Backbone is mostly 2x10 in the major areas, and we will hopefully be conducting a 100 gig upgrade for the core backbone this year. We are one of 120 NRENs worldwide. This is a map of the glyph infrastructure, which is not actually all of the NREN infrastructure, but it is a lot of it. And you can see that this is a pretty significant connectivity across the globe for researchers. And the idea is that we are all operated in the same sort of way. We are all here to make science happen. Just simply this section that is going across the Atlantic, there's over, I think there's nearly 800 gig of dedicated connectivity to research networks running across the Atlantic now. So our international network, it was a 1 gigabit international network in 2014. That was well and truly saturated by 2014. We have partnered with our Australian siblings, ARNet, for international connectivity since then. So there are a couple of ARNet people in the room. Thank you very much. This has been a critical part of enabling us to grow over the last few years. And at the moment, most New Zealand researchers have access to effectively limitless capacity internationally, thanks to a donation from Southern Cross Cable Networks of a 100 gig wavelength that connects us to Australia and us to the US for science. And that has been a huge investment by Southern Cross in the research and education community. And our partnership with AARNet is what's enabled us for the past few years to actually drive research in New Zealand. But what that means for us is that actually our international presence is AARNet. So we effectively hand over to AARNet in Whenuapai and Takapuna around Auckland. So at the moment today, RIANZ does not operate equipment outside of New Zealand. For the past 17 years, Southern Cross has been the system. It isn't great to now have both Hawaii and TGA broadening this. And Southern Cross has been very, very highly available. Like the figure 8 design is an amazingly strong design, but it was still recognized by government way back in 2008 that there is an interest in promoting a second cable for resiliency and to ensure competition in the marketplace. When the government decided to do that, they used RIANZ as a vehicle for that investment by giving us a $15 million grant to back a cable system. In 2011, so 3 years after that grant, we signed an agreement with Pacific Fibre. Unfortunately, Pacific Fibre never actually completed their funding and discontinued in 2012. We then signed an anchor tenancy agreement with Hawaii. It is worth $65 million in total over 25 years. Hawaii took another almost 2 years to complete funding of the cable, and as Hamid has already said, ready for service is June 2018. That's 10 years after the government chose to try and invest in a system, and it shows how long a plan you have to get this kind of infrastructure for the country. And this is really key for New Zealand researchers. By backing Hawaii, we have now a strategic investment for 25 years to support the demands of research and education. We have a service contract with Hawaii. It just has an exponential growth built into the service contract. And we start on day one with 20 gigabits a second towards Sydney and towards America. And it grows over to 2 terabits a second over 25 years to enable us to continue to support research. This is capacity that we have full control over as a research community in New Zealand. We can determine how we wish to use it, which is really critical now because more and more research is now not done between researcher to researcher. It's now researcher to cloud provider or researcher to infrastructure. So the world of R&E has changed, and we now need flexibility to be able to decide how we deal with traffic, not only to other universities and other research institutes, but to major players across the globe. So Hawaii, we've had the talk from Hamid, so I'm going to go pretty quickly through these ones. We've seen this picture. It goes from New Zealand up to a branching unit, down to Sydney, up through to Honolulu, Oahu in Hawaii, and Pacific City in Oregon. It's about 14,600 kilometers of cable. You've seen this graph again from Hawaii, from Hamid. For us, it's R&E services are very, very latency sensitive. We try to make sure that our network is constantly optimized for both latency and absolute zero packet loss. So for us, the latencies are really critical. Hawaii is for a second place system, it has actually got a very good latency map. So we are looking forward to being able to make sure that we are optimizing everything for our membership. You've seen pictures of this from both TGA and Hawaii, different types of cable. And as Hamid said, this dude is effectively walking the length of our cable. I don't know that I want to walk 14,500 kilometers, but they do. And for this build, they actually did multiple loads, so they might have walked it 2 or 3 times actually. It's all hand-packed back into each other. So every loop, they've got those people sitting around packing the cable back in so that it's all packed into the vessel. Again, stuff that Hamid talked about, it takes 5 months to survey, it takes about 8 months to build it. You have to find 2 very expensive ships They are quite impressive pieces of kit. Thank you very much to Hawaii for inviting me on the cable tour last Friday. It was a fantastic thing to go and explore. This is during the Marine Survey. Apparently Marine Survey ships use Windows XP. So this is the Global Sentinel. It's being loaded with the Hawaii cable at this point, and this is the one that's come from America down towards us. I really like this photo. It's the same thing. This is loading actually straight into the Global Sentinel, so this is where it's actually laid out of. The thing I like about this photo is that you can actually see the color of the cable changing. So we've talked about the fact that the cable gets more and more armoured as it gets more shallow to protect it, and it gets less armour as it goes deeper because the ocean protects it. But the cable is laid out of the ship, so they need to know where they're going to be at the right time. So the cable is constantly changing and manufactured to know at this point it will be laying this type of cable. They don't just chop and change the cable. It's one piece of 7,000 kilometre long piece of cable, and it's all in service on the boat. So they're not just rolling out another drum, splicing it onto the last one and carrying on. This thing is all running full, 7,500 kilometres worth of it on the boat, which I think is just fascinating. You really think about where the cable runs because you're not going to go unthread it. How do you install this? It takes about 6 months to lay it. I think it's fascinating that they can do about 200 kilometres a day when they're doing the deep ocean stuff. It's actually quite, 6 knots, I think, which is actually quite a pace for a vessel of the size of the boats. But when it's close to shore, they're ploughing it. So the 200 kilometres leaving New Zealand is apparently going to take the boat about 2 weeks. So you can see how much slower. I think it was 0.3 knots it can do when it's ploughing, which is not very fast. They can lay the cable within 1 metre of where they want it, even though it's 4 kilometres under the ocean floor, which I think is pretty amazing. The boat has stupid amounts of guidance systems, GPS systems, amazingly flexible engines and thrusters so that it can move in any which way it feels like. You've got to keep figuring out how you're laying the cable, but you're doing it for cable that's touching the ocean floor 40 kilometres behind you. So you're feeding the cable at different speeds to make sure it doesn't ever sit between 2 points and start rubbing on those points. It's always got to be on the ocean floor. And the ocean floor is just as varied as you can see straight out the window. And you've got to figure out how to get that cable to touch there 40 kilometres behind you, 4 kilometres down. I'm amazed this thing ever manages to do these things. That's the responder. That's the one I got to go have a look around. It's when it was berthed up in Auckland. That's Captain Ken. Captain Ken. He was a very good tour guide. I think he's got a life post cable laying in tourism. He's a very good tour. This Hamid showed you before. This is the 35-ton plough that they used to plough the cable in. So it gets fed up in this part up in here, and then goes right down through this blade that's cutting into the ocean floor and comes out at the back of it. So that's what's pushing it right down, and it's just being towed behind the boat. Hawaii has over 150 repeaters. You have massive power required. I think Hawaii's powered at 15,000 volts, which is scary. I don't think I want to go near that piece of equipment. As we've all heard the crazy numbers of how much capacity these things can have. And you have to build 4 landing stations to actually house all this stuff. Those are the repeaters, so that's on the boat in Auckland. So the cable is tiny. If you've seen the one that TGA are passing around, it's actually really, most of the cable's only about 1 centimetre thick. But these things are freaking huge. So the cable, and these are all inline, so you can see all these cables go out, back into those drums, then come up, put a repeater back into the drum, round and round and round. So it's all laid so that they can just roll it out of the back of the boat. This is the CLS at Mangawhai. So this is a custom-built building. Apparently it has to look pretty because Mangawhai is an expensive place. Aucklanders can't have their nice beach houses have a ugly cable landing station near them, apparently. As opposed to the TGA cable, Hawaii's cable is actually drilled out to the pointer past the surf. So I believe it's up to 1 kilometre. They actually drill under the ocean floor so it comes out. Then it's picked up by the boat and ploughed from then onwards. So the last little bit I'll go through is, what does it actually take to build an international network? Now, I know there's a lot of people in the room who know this from experience. They have built or run networks, but there's also probably a lot of you who I imagine have not actually had to build an international network. And it's been, it's a fun project. Hawaii gives us some really cool, very long pieces of fiber. That is not a network. What else do we have to have for this? We don't currently have an international network. We have ARNet doing it for us. It's been great, but now because we have Hawaii, we can extend our reach to touch all those providers in the US and in Sydney directly. So it gives us that little bit more control. No matter how good it's been with ARNet, it's always nice to have your own infrastructure out in those places. And apparently you pick where you land a cable because of the submarine bit, not because of the terrestrial bit, which makes sense if you're building a cable, but doesn't make sense if you're using a cable. So in New Zealand, these are the dots down here are places we already have infrastructure. Merrill Drive, North Shore, Whenuapai. It would be nice if it was near those. We're interested in Warkworth, and we're interested in Whangarei. It would be good if it landed there, but no, it lands at Mangawhai Heads. That's not a great place for landing a cable for us terrestrially. So there is no backhaul because it's a new building, so it's being built. RIANZ has, again, as part of our kind of public good stewardship, we have been pushing the market to deliver competitive backhaul solution into Hawaii's CLS. We've run an RFP process. That process is almost complete and will be announced very shortly, and the builds for that underway. Sydney, it lands at Coogee Beach, but it has a steel conduit taking us right the way into Sydney, into the Equinix SY4 building. So Equinix SY4 is shiny new Equinix building. This is great. We knew we wanted to be in Equinix anyway, so we're going to be able to be right next door to Hawaii, like literally a rack away. So this is it being landed at Coogee Beach, and because we knew we needed to be in Equinix and we could get it out of the way, this is our new POP that Aaron, back there somewhere, built for us the very last week of last year. We didn't feel like giving Aaron a Christmas break, so we sent him to Sydney instead. In Hawaii, there is another custom-built CLS. We can break out in Hawaii, and we will hope to do so at some point to be able to talk with the University of Hawaii and access some of the partnerships that we have with Hawaii. They're very big in education into the Pacific, which we'd like to support as well. So we will try to be able to get from the CLS to the DR Fortress site in Hawaii. US, again, is a little bit more complex. The CLS is down in Pacific City, which, again, is not a place you really want to be. Hawaii this time, actually, though, take us back up to Portland in Oregon, which is a better place to be, but it's still not really where we want to be. We really want to be up in Seattle. Luckily, there are really good partnerships we can build on with the US research networks, so we'll be using those to extend our network all the way up to Seattle. It's part of being part of this global research club is that we all try to build on each other's resources wherever possible. Resiliency. As Hamid said, Hawaii is a single line system, and we have a lot of faith in Hawaii, but that's 14,500 kilometers of single point of failure, which I don't really want to have in my network. So we'll be, again, looking for different partners for resiliency. We can't just have Hawaii, so TGA, SCCN, all the suppliers thereof are all will be part of RIANZ's new international network. Our partnership with ARNet carries on until mid-2019, which means I get a bit of a breather from RFS date before we actually have to have this ready. So we'll be looking at that one later. So, in summary, submarine communication systems are unbelievably cool. the engineering that goes into these things is fascinating. It has been great as anchor tenants that we've been able to actually have some view into this through our partnership with Hawaii. Thank you to Hawaii for supplying a lot of the photos. It's great to be able to actually show people what goes on in these cable systems. The other takeaway point for this is that the government investment through RIANZ is giving us a platform to build on for 25 years for New Zealand's researchers. And it's really critical for us to remain competitive in the global research ecosystem. We need these resources for researchers, and the government has helped stimulate a new cable coming into the market while also guaranteeing researchers the tools that they need. And we are looking very forward to being able to put another line on that huge map that you saw at the start with our own infrastructure, where New Zealand can actually stand up and say we contribute to the global research ecosystem as a country, which I think is something we should all be proud of as New Zealanders. Okay, not quite fitted, but we caught up a little bit. So I don't know if we're going to do questions or carry on, but if you want to come talk to me about any of this, then feel free to come and chat to me tonight or tomorrow.
Well, there's one burning question, but no one looks like it's burning. Everyone looks like they're melting.
All right, let me self-introduce just to keep it going. I'd like to put, before you change the slides, go back. I'd like to point out one thing. New Zealand isn't connected on this diagram, right? Anyway, okay. So my name is Rich Bayliss. I work at Arista Networks. I am also talking about a submarine cable system. No, I'm not. But I did want to talk about what we're going to use these submarine cable systems for. And I'm giving a presentation that some of you, who was at NZNOG last year? A few, enough. I'm going to give some new information on that as well. So if you've seen me talk about what's coming, I did actually add some slides in particular because at NZNOG in Australia, Jeff pointed out that I may have been defying the laws of physics, and since I work for a vendor, rather than address the issue, I thought I'd put some pretty slides in front of you and talk about SpaceX, talk about something slightly different. SpaceX is relevant. Does anyone know why? Because you guys are engineers, you should be right into this. About 10 hours ago, the Falcon Heavy was static tested in the US, and this is the most powerful rocket since the Saturn V's, which went to the moon in the 1970s. So we now have a rocket that could take us to the moon or take us to Mars or wherever, which I think is pretty cool. And it talks about, again, about the rules of physics and how we defy them. If we look at the history of SpaceX is already passé, and when they land one of their rockets, vertically, and everyone's like, well, yeah, they can do that now. But they've only been doing that since last year. So the first reuse of a rocket happened last year. But when you see them land, you go, yeah, okay, well, of course they can re-land a rocket. But up until that point in time, so the first time they landed one was in 2015, and they reused the rocket last year for the first time. Up until that point in time, the entire space program said that kind of thing was against the rules of physics. And so the whole point is that innovation solves impossible challenges, and we should just kind of assume that these things can work in the future, even if they don't necessarily seem to work out today. If you look at the business implication of that, because I think that people care, and there are business people in the room as well, up until SpaceX came along, ULA had the exclusive launch rights to the US Air Force and would charge them over $400 million a launch. SpaceX now, it's under $100 million, so you can see the advantages of new technology. But what's really interesting to me is the exponential curve on the right. That red line is about the average over history of ULA and how many launches a year they can get up and off the ground. Now that we can reuse rockets, you can see last year, they actually launched 18 separate missions last year, and this year they're going for more than one every 2 weeks. They've already had one successful this year. And so again, up until a breakthrough in technology, what was previously impossible completely changes the economics of the market. Which brings us to another kind of very brief interlude, and I did promise I would get us out on time, and I will, is Voyager from the 1970s, 1977. If you look at the evolution of what humans have thrown into space, in the next couple of days, we will actually launch a Tesla Roadster to put it in orbit around Mars. So SpaceX should do that within the next couple of days. It's already on the launching pad. It will go through, unless it explodes, it will make it into to Mars. If you think about that, the Voyager has 6 separate computing units. The flight data system, about 80,000 operations a second, and 16 kilobytes of memory. If you look at a brand new Tesla off the lot with the level 5 drive systems based on the NVIDIA PX2s, we're talking about, again, 6 CPUs, but it supports 24 gigabytes of memory in your car and supports a whopping 320 teraflops of operations. So that's like a 1.5 million times improvement. What we used to throw into space, what we still throw into space, but is generally for most people a car. Before you complain about it, yes, I know NASA has a lot of Ed Harrises on the ground that keeps things working, and the AI in the Tesla car is supposed to keep you driving. But the point is, technology continues to improve, and once we get to a certain level of technology, we start to look for like really stupid things and ways of wasting it. So while we have 12 terabit per second submarine cables, and I know that's a huge amount of effort to go lay that cable, we're going to fill those up, and we're going to fill them up really quickly. This is a sort of graph that people normally present, so I felt I had to include it. But it's kind of old news. We know that internet usage is continuing very rapidly. A brief shout out to IX Australia. They worked out that if you had a port that you were running at 1 gig, it was really able to be run at 10 gigs, so why not give you all the speed for the same price. But if you look at their usage uptakes, what you actually see, which for me is the most interesting thing, because the presentation said I'm going to talk about 800 gig interfaces, and you're like, why do I need that, Rich? If you look at the growth rates, once you start to work out that the CAGR is 100% or 274% year on year, and I'm sorry I don't have stats for IX Australia and New Zealand, funnily enough, but by 2020 you can see that these sites are well in excess of hundreds of gigabits per second, and that's consistent with what we would see here in New Zealand as well. And so the question that we would have is, are you really kind of leveraging the investment that you've already made? And there is a little bit of subtext in my talk about trying to get the most out of the network equipment that you buy. Right? We all buy network equipment. Well, I hope you all buy network equipment. But you can run it at different speeds. The faster speed you use, the more value you're getting. So when people say, how do I reduce my costs? Well, run it faster. And that's the simple answer. If you look in Australia, New Zealand, in APAC in general, what's happening in terms of data? NEP in Australia, they've launched live streaming of IP-based networking. 10 cameras in the stadium, each camera running up to 12 gigabits per second. So you can see how you're getting more than 100 gigabits per second from a single event. If you look at the Microsoft Brainwave with its deep learning and advanced networking capabilities, Azure has been putting more than 30 gigabits per second now to a single host. So you can see that advanced networking is permeating through. 10 gig interfaces don't cut it for a Sony camera. Obviously, the use of Brainwave is driving 50 gig in the data center. So these applications are catching up. If you want to run your system faster, so there's a little bit here. It's, if you want to run more data through it, there's a couple of different levers that we have to pull. The first one is the lane speed. So there's a chip, and then there's a number of lanes that come off that. Based on a PAM4 SerDes at 50 gigabits per second, which is just arriving in market now, you'll be able to, for a single lane, obviously 50 gigabits per second. If you look at things like QSFP, which we've used for a number of years, a QSFP is a 4 by 10, QSFP 28, is a 4 by 25, so 100. So you can kind of see how the math has already worked out for you. And what I'll talk about is OSFP and SFP-DD, or double density. And these are two form factors that help us get to the higher speeds using 50 and in the future 100 gigabit per second, which gets us to 400 gig this year and 800 gig by 2020. So this is the transition point that we're at right now. It is a very exciting time because where we're at is something that looks like this. In the past, when I've talked about these, we say 32 by 400 gig on a single chip performance is what we forecast. In December, Broadcom announced the Tomahawk 3. Running at 50 gig SerDes, 32 by 400 gig in a single chip. So if you do the math on that single network processor, you're talking 12.8 terabits per second. So a single chip can drive that cable that goes all the way to the US, one chip. So it's phenomenal how dense these systems are getting. Pushing down to the 16 nanometer process is part of how we do that. What that means is that we're seeing a rapid decrease in use of 40 gig. And again, that comes back to efficiency. 40 gig uses 4 lanes, and if we can use those 4 lanes to run at 100 gig or those 4 lanes to run at 400 gig, then you can see that it makes the most sense for you to do that. But last year, we also saw a massive uptake in 100 gig usage. And again, the most efficient usage of your systems. But towards the very end of this year, we'll start to see 400 gigs starting to ramp. And while I don't expect that we'll be deploying a lot of it into New Zealand in the near future, it certainly is going to become part of how you aggregate dense 100 gig deployments. If you look at the form factors, there's 3 competing form factors. I'm going to eliminate immediately CFP8 because it's so big. If you look at the 2 competing form factors, what we see here is around QSFP double density or OSFP. And I will walk through both of those in as vendor neutral way as I can. QSFP double density announced March last year. 62 companies. If you look at it, the 8 lanes at the moment running at either 28 or 56 gigabits per second, giving you a peak speed of 400 gigabits per second. The density is about 36 per 1 rack unit. Depending on the speeds that you can get about 14.4 terabits per second in a single rack unit. So let that one sink in for a little while. 14.4 terabits per second in a single rack unit. To put that in perspective, I know from personal experience that there are companies in New Zealand that have deployed equipment at the densities, routing equipment at the densities of 6 terabits per second in a single RU. 6 terabits per second in a 2 RU system. So getting that double in half the space is pretty impressive. The thermal capacity here, 12 watts, it doesn't seem like we're making any savings there. I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But it's plug and play, it's easy, we already know SFP, it's the same form factor. And so one of the things that you'll hear about QSFP-DD is it's backwards compatible. Now, backwards compatible means it's the same shape and size and you can kind of plug it in. Backwards compatible doesn't mean that you can take something that is expecting to run at 56 gigabits per second per lane, plug it into the device that isn't capable of that and expecting the peak speed. It also means that if you have a system designed for higher speed, so a 400 gig system, and then you take a 100 gig optic and put that in, you're burning 75% of your port capacity, which you're not using. So perhaps it's not the best investment for you. And the backward compatibility there is something that we'll get through and we'll move on. Similar with the OSFP, which is the alternative form factor, it supports 56 or 112 gigabit per second SerDes, so supporting 400 gig and 800 gig. Again, here you can see the densities, 36 by 1 IU, looking at around something like with 400 gig optics, 14.4, which is the same because it's the same speed as QSFP-DD, but looking to that 2020 timeline, potentially as high as 28.8 terabits per second in a single rack unit, so earth-shattering fast. The thermal capacity has actually been designed slightly higher, and as such, OSFP is a slightly larger form factor because it has a built-in heat sink. If you spend a lot of time looking at optics, thermal dissipation is a reason for optics failing, so obviously having heat sinks, maybe it's overkill, maybe it's not, but obviously it should support that higher thermal dissipation, but also mean that you can run a range of different optics, which I will get through in the next 4.5 minutes. OSFP can, because it's larger, can support QSFP DD, so there is at least backward compatibility, but again, asterisk, why are you using a lower speed QSFP in an OSFP form factor? But it is possible. The nice thing about OSFPs is that because it has that thermal capacity of about 15 watts, for the first time you can actually have the full range of optic requirements within a single form factor, meaning that those CFP2s that you might be using for 200 gig today, with the digital coherent optics, DCOs, you could support those in the same form factor as the OSFP. So traditionally, if you look at a system, there might be a large number of user ports with a couple of uplink ports. That will disappear, and you can use any port in any particular combination. In terms of architecture as well, this is a data center design, and it really, because it shows all the way from a server, which is where as I showed before, a lot of the bandwidth growth is coming from, through to the architecture. But what you can kind of see, there's obviously a range of different optics that are being used, but bang, now it's 400 gig. You can see roughly where the 400 gig starts to come in at the spine layer and aggregating into DCI. But the architecture is the same, and in a lot of cases the fiber plant can be reused. So it should be somewhat of a fairly pain-free transition in that regard. It won't require rethinking the fiber plant. And similarly to other existing fiber technologies, it's not likely that you're going to go or wait for PCIe 5.0, which has been announced in October. It's more likely with PCIe 4, which is now finally a standard, as those server technologies come online and 100 gig in the server becomes more commonplace, that you use a breakout cable. And so there's a number of different form factors that are already being worked on. But the DCO is the interesting one for me because, as I said, now we can start to look at 100 gig reach in the same form factor, and we don't have to worry about CFP2s. And with the capacities here, we're able to get to things like 20 terabits per second per dark fiber, which, as I said, is how we're going to fill up these submarine cables, which is good news for everyone, but we need to build more boats, I think, is the answer. And then there's obviously a range of different optical form factors that are being looked at. I did put this one up because MMC asked this in Australia. He said, well, hey, what about power efficiency? 400 gig sounds great, but I don't want to use more power in the data center. It's actually really important to point out that things like Tomahawk 3, actually in the press release that Broadcom put out, they anticipate that it will require roughly 40% less power. If you do my calculations here, you can see it's between 28 to 57% more power efficient, depending on the type of optic that you're looking to replace at that maximum thermal budget. So what we're actually seeing is that you will reduce the amount of energy that you require by using higher speed interfaces. It kind of makes sense, but I wanted to put that out there. And by this stage, and I have 60 seconds left to go, you're saying, well, hang on, what, 400, 800? Yeah, okay, cool. Last talk of the day, let's get on the boat. Let's not get carried away. The point is, if we think about the units that we're using to construct, or the way in which we dimension our network, you actually come up with a lot of rules of thumb, and I will get through this, but essentially it's more efficient to use, instead of using 40 gig, it makes far more efficiency to use 100 gig, because it's still using 4 lanes on your switching silicon. So you often will have a port that you can run at 40 or 100. How do you reduce the cost of your network? Well, you run it at 100 and you take the extra 60 gig for free. Same with a lot of technologies that are in the market today. You could run them at 10 gig or 25 gig. Why would you run them at 25 gig? Well, you get 2.5 times more bandwidth. To prove it out mathematically, here are the lanes, the port speeds, and the usable ports. If you run at 25 gig or 50 gig, you actually get a 2.5 times total bandwidth of your system. So again, 25 and 50 makes far more sense, and it packs neatly into 100. 100 packs neatly into 400. So we start to get more efficient in the way that we build and pack these interfaces. PCIe 3.4, as I said, got announced, but it's still not in any available technology. If you look at 25 gig today, you'll actually see 25 gig is more efficient in using the 8 gigatransfer lanes of PCIe. So what essentially If you want to get the most out of your servers and max out your PCIe, then using 25 gig makes sense, or a combination of that, so 50 gig. And similarly, when PCIe 4 becomes more commonplace, they're multiplying, again, they're using the 50 gig SerDes, so it goes to 16 gigatransfers per PCIe 4 lane, meaning that the math is still correct. 25 and 50 are still more efficient than 10 or 40, which don't break down as nicely. Okay, so in kind of summary, if you want to look at this, 1 minute over, sorry. If you want to leverage this, some of the things that we're recommending for people today is look at how you architect. Obviously, for things like 10 gig, IX Australia was saying, hey, if it's a 10 gig port, why don't we use it as 10 gig? If your port's 25 gig, you can also look at that. You can get 2.5 times more bandwidth to a server. If you're looking at storage nodes, you can get 100% more storage nodes into your network. Or if you're looking at a leaf spine, or in fact, if you're looking at other parts of your wider area network, you can get 2.5 times higher capacity out of your infrastructure if it's a 40/100 gig interface. And that will help you prepare for this year. This year, you'll see people with 400 gig, and those guys are going to be the really cool guys, so you want to catch up to them, right? Anyway, thank you very much. Yeah.
My brain hurts. That was really fast. Thank you very much. I would like to really thank our last couple of speakers for catching up time, and apologise to the last 4 speakers for not having time for questions. But if you do have questions for them, just hold on to them, ask them over dinner, or catch up with them in the breaks tomorrow. Astoundingly, it is 2 minutes past 5. So we have a whole 15 minutes for people who are going on the boat to get down 5 layers of stairs down to the foyer. Cool. So we'll see you down there at 1:15 if you're going on the boats. If you're going to do the walking bus to the ice bar, that's 5 minutes after that, and 20 minutes down in the foyer. So thank you all for coming along. Appreciate it. See you tomorrow morning.